Where do you buy your repair sheet metal from? If you're like me and you're relatively new to fixing up old vehicles, it can be a daunting task to try and figure out who sells the highest quality parts. On today's episode of Cody Builds, I hope I can help you answer that question. Welcome back to Cody Builds. On today's episode, I wanted to take a look at two of the larger sheet metal distribution companies that most home builders are going to be using, especially if you're talking about classic trucks, and that would be LMC Truck and Auto Metal Direct, or AMD. I had some experience with my 1975 Ford F-150 where I've recently had to buy some patch panels, and due to availability of stock between LMC and AMD, I ended up buying patch panels from both companies. And what that's provided me is a unique opportunity to look at those patch panels, compare the quality, the prices, the point of origin, all those things, and report back to you guys on what I'm seeing, and hopefully help you make a decision on which company you want to spend your money with. Sometimes you're not going to have an option. And that's what I've learned in this process is neither of these companies offer every piece of sheet metal that you might need for your truck. One of them offers a little bit more than the other, and that has its pluses and minuses, and we'll talk about that. The other thing I want to say is I'm not paid by either of these companies. I spent my hard-earned money on these panels, and if you're like me, that means something. Your money is hard-earned, and you don't want to be wasting it on a crummy product. So, and not saying that I've received any crummy products, but I just wanted to say, I'm not shilling for one company or the other. I see positives and negatives in both of them in the products that I've received. So today is really about providing you with more information to maybe help you make a decision when it comes time to spend your hard-earned cash on the parts you need to fix up your old vehicle. Specifically, what we're going to be looking at today are the wheel arch panels for a dent side Ford and the lower quarter patch panels for a dent side Ford. Now, I've got a left and a right, one from each company. And on the left here, what you see is the products I received from LMC Truck. And on the right are the products I received from Auto Metal Direct. You'll notice that I have a left and a right, and that's because one company had, I tried to initially order everything through LMC, and they did not have the corresponding lower quarter panel patch. They were out of stock. So I ordered that through Auto Metal Direct. When I received my shipment from LMC, there were some things about this quarter patch panel that I was not very thrilled with. And I do want to take a moment to say, I didn't reach out for a refund. I'm not bashing LMC. I'm actually very impressed with the quantity of products they have for these classic trucks. And I think some of the things we're going to talk about is a matter of, it's the eye of the beholder. What do you consider to be a good versus a bad product? I didn't reach out for a refund for a number of reasons. One, the hassle of trying to ship parts like sheet metal back. Two, down the line, whether it's on this truck or another truck, I eventually will use these panels. And I'll explain why I wasn't super thrilled with them specifically for this project when we get talking about the quality and the fitment. So what I did was I went ahead and I ordered 2 additional panels from AMD that were also these wheel arch patch panels. Now, in addition to that, I did order internal wheel wells, the wheelhouses. Funny enough, the LMC did not have both wheel arches, so I ended up ordering, I think, a left from them and a right from AMD. When those arrived, the wheel arch from LMC was actually shipped by AMD. So one thing I'm learning in this process is neither of these manufacturers use all the same distributor for their parts, their supplier for their parts. I think they're working through multiple different suppliers. LMC, especially, in one order from them, I've got 3 different manufacturers. So AMD, the products labeled AMD being one of them, and I wasn't able to source exactly where those wheelhouses came from. So I don't know. AMD all came from the same manufacturer. So it may be that AMD is working directly with one singular manufacturer there. but because those wheel arches were not labeled with that supplier's product label, I had kind of assumed that they may not be actually working with the same supplier for all their parts, but that's more speculation on my part. So let's jump right into it. First thing I want to talk about is cost. Okay, first up, the wheel arch replacement panels from LMC. These panels I paid $16.95 each, so they were $17 each. Another reason why I didn't feel the need to try and return them, it wasn't some giant expense on these panels. And to me, even just having the sheet metal around the shop is worth it for even if I'm just cutting this thing up and using it to patch small areas or anything like that. So yeah, these are $17, not too costly. Interestingly enough, this is the only panel of the entire bunch that's made in the USA. So keep that in mind. You'll notice it's not E-coated. My understanding is the E-coating on these panels, when you see that, that's typically associated with manufacturers that are overseas, because inevitably these panels are going to be put into a shipping container, put on a giant ship, shipped across the ocean, and that entire time while they're at sea, they're exposed to salt water in the air, salt in the environment. So that E-coat is meant to protect these panels as they're being shipped overseas. So typically when you see that black E-coat on these panels, that is a signifier that most likely that panel has been shipped from overseas. I'm not going to say with 100% certainty there aren't any US manufacturers doing that, but that's my general understanding. So next up is the repair patch, the wheel arch repair patch from AMD. These were $20.49, I believe, each. So slightly more, about $3.50 more each. Again, not a huge expense, and there's pluses and minuses to this panel as well. So between those two panels, so price-wise, you're not looking at a huge difference between those panels. The one thing I would say is in the few shipments I've gotten from AMD and LMC, there was some slight differences in shipping costs as well. On the bulk items, the larger items, I got a header panel from LMC trucks. When I priced that out from AMD and also from LMC, there was about a $50 difference in that shipping cost. And that's for large bulk items. For the smaller shipments, there was less of a difference, but it was still slightly more through AMD. So important thing to consider. Now, for the lower repair quarter panels, this is the panel from LMC. This was $24.95, so right at $25. I'm not crazy thrilled with this panel. We'll talk about this when we get into things like fitment and general quality and thickness. Again, I think there's pluses and minuses for each of these pieces of sheet metal, but you'll see why when I compare it. I want to say that up front because the corresponding panel from AMD is $35. So that's a $10 difference between panels. So if you're buying a left and a right, you're talking about a $20 difference from AMD to LMC. There's reasons for that, and we'll talk about that. In this instance, specifically for this panel, I think it is 100% worth the $10 difference, but we're going to get into that. So next up, I want to talk about the individual manufacturers for each of these panels. So first up is the wheel arch replacement, and you can see here I had to peel back some of LMC stickers to reveal the manufacturer for this one, and it's Tabco. Now again, this is the only panel made in the US, okay? And I know that's important for some of you guys. It's important for me. When we can support American companies and American workers, I'm all about that. I have a harder time when you pay more money for an inferior product. I'm not saying that's the case necessarily with this product, but I want to show you now the deficiencies in this product and why upon receiving these panels, I immediately went out and ordered replacements from AMD. So the first thing I noticed, and some of these things are going to be hard to pick up on camera, but look, you can see actually the shadow in this. There is a crease in this body line, and it runs almost the full length of this panel, okay? That crease should not be there. So this looks like maybe a die issue. I don't know how if they press form these things, but you can see, like there, you get a pretty good shot of the line right down the middle of that panel. Maybe that's not a big deal to you, but at a minimum, you're either going to have to work this out, or you're going to be filling this with Bondo if you're trying to do a repaint on your truck. We're not doing a repaint on this truck. We're not going to the level of putting filler in my bed. We're trying to keep things honest. I am going to repaint some things on it. Like these patch panels will get repainted back brown. I'm not necessarily concerned about putting Bondo in and filling those things up. I kind of just want to keep this a real honest truck, because I'm going to leave exposed weld lines and things like that in the bed. But if you're a guy trying to do a restoration and you want, you know, a top quality paint job, this panel is going to require significant body work. The other thing I noticed, let me see if you can see it here in the camera. When you look down, this one's going to be a little harder to see. This panel's wavy all the way down it. It just looks like a really bad. It looks like you can kind of see it here. There's a big old whammy in that. It's a big old dent right there. This whole panel is just wavy, and it's almost like they've either got a really bad dye, or if this thing was handmade, it kind of looks like it might have been handmade, hand rolled. The other thing I noticed was on this lip. Look at the scratches in this thing on the lip. So again, these are all like quality deficiencies I'm not like super pumped about. Maybe, and again, we're talking about, what did I say? This was a $17 panel. So, you know, I'm sure this Tabco's cranking these things out. They don't, honestly, they probably don't care. And it should be on, you know, it should be on the company who's selling their products to do a little bit of quality control as well. So, you know, that's a little bit on LMC. Again, maybe these things don't bother you. As far as metal thickness, this one measured out about, it's a 19 gauge panel. It measured out in different spots, somewhere between 40 and 45 thousandths thick, mostly 42, 43 thousandths thick, okay? One common complaint that people have about panels coming from overseas is that they're thin. And we will see that in one of these panels. But I can tell you, the panel I got from AMD, exact same gauge. It's 19 gauge sheet metal, it's the same thing. Now, where this panel shines, you'll see when I'm actually going to do a demonstration and fit this over the top of the bedside. The alignment on this panel is superior to the AMD panel. So again, pluses and minuses. What do you want to fight with? Do you want to fight with the body work, or do you want to fight with actually fitting this panel in when you go to weld it up? So that's kind of all the things that I noticed about this panel from LMC. Now I'm going to move up next to the AMD wheel arch panel. Okay, I'm going to start with the package that this came in. This is a TriPlus product. Okay, TriPlus Automotive is a Taiwanese manufacturer. So AMD is sourcing their panels, as far as I can tell, the bulk of their panels from TriPlus, a Taiwanese company, at least for the Ford panels that I'm buying. Now this may be different. I have to qualify this. Everything that I'm looking at is for a Denside Ford. So maybe you're receiving something different for different models, different models of cars, different muscle cars, different Airs. I don't know the extent of what TriPlus is manufacturing, but that's what I have to compare to. So, and I do think the quality of the panels tells you a little bit about each of the companies, maybe. Let's take a look at this panel. Right off the bat, when I received these panels, I'm super pleased with them. The quality issues in the stamping are not there. Maybe this line isn't quite as defined around the wheel arch, but it actually fits my truck's body lines a little bit better with that regard. It's not a super sharp line on my truck bed. So when I received these, I was immediately thrilled with this. Exact same metal thickness as the LMC panel. So no issues there. It's not that, you know, this is some cheap coming from China or something. And I do think it's important that we talk about that a little bit. not all overseas manufacturers are the same. Yes, it's true. If you're going through China for a lot of things, it's going to be done as cheaply as possible with very low quality components. However, I don't think it's fair to lump Taiwan in with China, as we see with a lot of tools. The manufacturing in Taiwan is just up to a higher standard than it is in China for the most part. Not saying you don't have bad manufacturers in Taiwan or good manufacturers in China. It's just that on the average, what I've seen in the products that I've bought is that when it comes to the automotive industry, Taiwan is slightly better at making products than China is. They're using quality products. They have higher quality control. You know, I know a lot of guys who can't necessarily afford to buy Snap-on Mac tools, and you might look to something like Tecton. Tecton's a perfect example, manufactured in Taiwan. That's a high quality product that may not be up to the standard of, say, something built in the US, but there are also bad US manufacturers as well. So it's give or take. You know, all these things are always give and take. What we hope as a consumer is that the companies that are selling these products are doing their due diligence, and they are, you know, combing through the manufacturers and delivering a quality product to us. So it's not that LMC and AMD are making their own panels. They're sourcing them from all different manufacturers, and the hope is that they want to sell a lot of panels, and the way they're going to sell a lot of panels is by selling quality products. So that's not always the case. And some of that is just based on availability and who's willing to make the dang thing. Sometimes you don't have options. Sometimes you're down to one manufacturer. As we see here, not necessarily the case with these automotive panels, but maybe more of the specialty panels, that is the case. So as far as the AMD panel goes, general first impressions, I was pleased with it. You'll see why after I started playing around with some fitment things. That's where the negative comments are going to come in on this particular panel. So we'll do a one-to-one comparison of fitment on the bedside for these wheel arch panels. I'm not going to do that for the lower panels. It's not exactly a fair comparison because I have a left and a right. This bed of mine is so whipped and so full of body filler in certain places that I don't think if we're not doing an apples and apples comparison of the same size, I'm not sure how much value that will provide. But there's other indicators on those panels to tell you which one is of a higher quality. And so for that, let's jump to the LMC provided lower quarter patch panel. So for this panel, we go to LMC's third supplier, CHL. Now I already said AMD supplied their inside wheel arches. Tabco provided those outer wheel arch patch panels. CHL provided this panel as well as the header panel for the bed. CHL is also a Taiwanese company. If I had to make a choice based off of what I've seen from the AMD TriPlus products and the two CHL products I have, I would go with TriPlus every day of the week. The quality in this panel is nowhere near as good as the TriPlus panels. So first off, the thickness of this panel. This is the thinnest panel that I got from all the patch panels I ordered. This panel measured out at 35 thousandths thick. Considering there's also an E-coat on this, you know, you're probably less than 35 thousandths thick in this panel. That's getting on the thin side. All things considered, when you first look at this panel, it looks okay. It doesn't look too bad. But the more you look at it, you can see kind of this bottom line is actually pretty wavy. Again, some of these things are going to be hard to show up on camera, but it's not exactly a crisp line. And then when you look at the body line on this one is going to be hard to tell. So I'm going to actually grab the AMD panel for comparison, because the lines in this are nowhere near as sharp. They're much more rounded over. They're much smoother. They're not nearly as clean and crisp as the AMD panel, including the wheel arch line up here. So let me grab that other panel and let's do a direct comparison. Okay, this back panel is our AMD panel. Now, you can actually see, look how clean and sharp that body line is, especially when compared to this one. You can see this is kind of rolled. It's not nearly, it's a little deceiving in the camera with the lights, but this is actually a defined body line on this panel, and this, it's more just like rolled over. Also, look how clean and sharp our lines are on the wheel arch here as compared to this panel, which they're just, you know, much more rounded over. They're not nearly as sharp. When we're looking down the same body line, this is not even remotely wavy. It's got a nice stamping. It's very clean. The bottom side lip here is very clean, whereas this one is a little wavy and it's definitely pinched. You can see, again, just like the Tabco panel, there's scratches all down the bottom side of this where it's being released from the press. So much cleaner panel here. The biggest difference between these two panels, this panel is a whopping 52 thousandths thick. This panel is somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 thousandths thick, and we just, as we said, being E-coated, this is probably like 33, 34 thousandths, and this is probably 50 thousandths. So you're talking 15 thousandths of an inch thickness difference, and you can feel it in these panels. You pick this panel up, it feels light. You pick this panel up, it feels heavy. This is probably thicker than the material that's actually on the truck. So in my mind, you want to be as close as possible to the original metal, but I'll opt for thicker metal every day of the week if given the option for this sheet metal. It's going to help take heat when you're welding. It's going to minimize warpage. So hands down, this AMD Tri-Plus patch panel wins the conversation every day of the week over these panels. Now, like I said, because I have a left and a right, I'm not going to go into fitment too much, but I did put them up on the truck. I think they both fit fairly well. Fitment's always a hard thing to gauge because we're talking about 40, 50-year-old vehicles here that have probably had a lot of body work done to them. The stamps that these things are made out of are not the original dies and stamps, so you're just naturally going to have differences there. They're just going to fight you a little bit. The only way to get around that is to buy old sheet metal from a donor car, and you have a better chance of things fitting right up out of the gate. So yes, that's a common complaint. Fitment of patch panels is a common complaint, but also I think you have to kind of keep that in perspective of what we're dealing with. Old vehicles, repair panels that are not OEM panels. So it's like anything else. If the factory didn't make it, it's probably not going to fit as well. So that's just a general understanding for those things. Now, the last thing I want to do, I want to compare a direct apples to apples comparison on the wheel arch replacement patches, and then we'll do a little bit of wrap up and talk about the general findings. All right, first up, I'm gonna grab our panel from AMD. Now, as I was saying, this is the panel I was most excited about. I thought, hey, this was the answer to all my questions where there were some manufacturing defects in the panel from Tabco that was made in the US. And then I went to fit this thing kind of about where it's gonna go. And the first thing I noticed is this body line is super out of whack. Like if I get it where it needs to be to line up, it doesn't really line up in the wheel arches. It's going to be a little hard to tell, but let's just stick this panel up under the wheel arch, right? You can look over here. We are below the body line over here. Over there, we're even or slightly even above it. That tells me that this stamping is slightly off in its proportions somewhere. Which, we can make that work. We can make this panel work. It would require some work, but we can make this panel work. It's just, you hope that it would be closer than this. It's way out to lunch. Like right now, as I try and line this body line up here, you can see we're off almost an inch in the wrong direction over there. So when you try and compromise, ultimately what it means is I think the distance between the wheel lip and this body line is shorter on this panel than it is on my actual truck. And I really want to weld this panel up behind the trim so as to conceal a good amount of that welding that I'm going to be doing. So You know, that's where the negatives for the AMD panel come in on that one. That is just a general, like, really egregious fitment issue on that panel. Compared to the panel made in the US. Now, look at that. I mean, that thing darn near fell right into place. The fit on this is far superior to that AMD panel, but you're dealing with really bad stamping issues. I mean, I'm even looking at it now. The wheel arch detail here, you're probably an inch here, and it's probably an inch and a half over here. Like, there's no consistency in that line. It's thick over here, it's thin over here. I'm not crazy thrilled about that, but this panel actually lines up far better than the AMD panel is. So, again, pluses or minuses. To me, after seeing this panel I was super down on is probably the panel I'm actually gonna be using to do this, because the fit is so much better on the actual truck versus that AMD panel. So, take that information for what you will. Okay, so where does that leave us? You know, like I said, there's pluses and minuses with both of these companies. The one thing I will say, LMC is trying to provide you with all the parts you need to restore your truck. So they're not solely focused on sheet metal. They are an incredible resource. I've already placed a ton of orders through them. I will continue to place orders through them. But I think their goal as a company, it seems to me, is just to be able to provide you with the parts you need to fix your truck. And some compromise there has to be made if they can only find one manufacturer who can make the parts, or, you know, they make a deal for the same manufacturer to manufacture a number of different parts, okay? So what I think is being sacrificed slightly there is quality for some of these things. Like, there's no reason that Tabco panel made in the US, there's no reason that it shouldn't be, that the body line shouldn't be so rough on that panel. I know it's a $17 panel, and I'm sure they're just cranking them out, but to me, that's just like a straight quality issue. I didn't have that issue on any other panel that was made out of the US. So that to me just tells me either they're die, they're stamped, something's wrong in their process, and they're not overly concerned about fixing it, because the panels were wrong on, I had the same issues on both the left and the right panel from Tabco. So I even did a little digging on them because I was disappointed. When you see something made in the US, you hope that it's of a higher quality. And I looked back through some of their more recent reviews online, which is always a take with a grain of salt, because you're really only going to hear from the people who are disappointed or upset about a product. It's rare that you see the glowing reviews, right? But what I saw in those reviews was really confirmation of what I'm seeing in these panels. There was a lot of complaints about quality, about the stampings, about gouges, about waves in the panels. So take that with a grain of salt. I'm gonna probably end up using that Tabco panel. Like I said, it fits the truck better. Even though for me, I want a panel that has cleaner body lines, because I'm not gonna be putting filler into these panels. So it's just something I'm gonna live with. I mean, honestly, if you look at the rest of this truck, who really cares if the body lines are slightly dented? I mean, look at it. It's the whole bed's dented, and we're gonna have that patina, that well-worn look. So maybe that panel even fits the theme better. So, you know, that's kind of what I feel about LMC in a nutshell. Multiple different suppliers, right? So that's having to track the quality of a lot of parts, a lot of pieces for a lot of different vehicles. I'm sure that's a challenge. And had I not received any AMD products, aside from the quality issues on those Tabco panels, I probably wouldn't have known any better. The thickness of that one CHL panel, that's pretty disappointing. That thing is paper thin. That really kind of stinks. You know, there's no reason for that to be the case in that panel. It could be made out of 19 gauge, just like everything else. Now, AMD, Auto Metal Direct, it's in their name, metal. Their prices are slightly higher, as we talked about. With the exception of the one panel, the one wheel arch panel that didn't have great fitment, I think it outshines the LMC products in every other way. At least that I'm able to see in the comparisons that I have. So for me, Auto Metal Direct, because they're staking their name on the quality of the metal products they're providing you, they probably are slightly more picky about their suppliers. Now, these are all my conjecture and my opinions. So, you know, take it for what you will. I'm going to continue to use both of these companies, but honestly, when it comes to sheet metal components, I'm likely going to lean towards AMD. Now, the other thing that I noticed is that AMD's selection of panels is not as wide as LMC's is. And that is likely because they are restricting their suppliers to only those who they know supply quality parts. And that's how you keep a reputation as a company. If you, as the distributor, are willing to distribute crummy parts, eventually that's going to blow back on your brand, even though you're not the one making the parts. So my guess is that what they're doing is they're working with very few specific retailers in order to deliver good quality parts to you. So when it comes to sheet metal, personally, I'm going to be sticking with the AMD supplied panels. Don't read into what I'm not saying. I will continue to use LMC. I'm not saying anything negative about LMC. I just think they are a much broader, they're providing a much wider range of products. And quite honestly, they're doing us a service for some of those products where they can't be sourced through any other company. You know, LMC is selling panels that I cannot get anywhere else. So when that is my option, I will gladly take that option. But you know, I think it's worthwhile comparing these companies and letting you guys see a direct comparison when I have the ability to do that. So that's what we did here today. Hopefully you find the information useful. If you do, give the video a like. Check out some of my other content. I'm working on this 1975 F-150. We're doing a resto mod on this truck. It's been lowered. It's got full QA1 suspension. I did a whole build series on the chassis. I just am wrapping up the long bed to short bed conversion on the box itself. So give those videos a watch. If you like what you see, please subscribe. Thank you for all you guys who are subscribed, who all watch all the videos, comment, like on the comments. I really, really appreciate you. And remember, as always, if you don't work on your project, it's not going to work on itself. Get out in the garage, get building, and I'll see you on next week's episode of Cody Builds.